Hello, I'm Olly and this is Criminally, where I talk about crime, pulp, horror, that kind of thing. Today, 18 books and 2 DNFs. It's everything I read in March. Actually, this won't be quite everything I read in March. I did read some comics towards the end of the month as well, some manga and some Commando war comics. But I've decided I'm just going to cover those in my weekly wrap-up. So that will have gone up on the Saturday before this video. So if you want to see me talk about those, check out that video if you haven't seen it already. So I've got 18 books to talk to you about today. A lot of the books I read this month were digital, so there are, as you can tell, less than 18 books here. And I did have 2 DNFs as well. I don't always talk about DNFs on the channel, but I thought it was worth touching on these two this month because there were particular reasons why I DNF'd them. It was March Mystery Madness, as you probably remember, in March, so a lot of the books I'm going to be talking about today are mystery novels, but by no means all of them. But I had a fantastic time being a co-host of March Mystery Madness again. I really enjoyed that event, and it reminded me just how much I love mysteries. So big thanks to Troy Tell and Lizzie Fay Loves Books for creating that event in the first place. I'm really delighted to have been a co-host again. Right, let me talk about the books. And as usual, I will talk about them in the order I read them, and then at the end I will tell you my favourite book of the month. So the first thing I finished this month then was for March Mystery Madness, The Saint-Fiacre Affair by Georges Simenon, one of the Maigret novels. So the theme of March Mystery Madness this year was decades, and one of the ways you could kind of play with that theme was to read a book from multiple decades. So I did that starting from the 1930s. My plan was to go up to the 2020s, but I didn't quite make it. I ended up not reading a book from the 2020s, so I'll talk about that towards the end of the video. So the Saint-Fiacre Affair then, a Maigret book, as I've said, so set in Belgium and about this kind of rather, I don't know how you describe Maigret, kind of a bit kind of beaten down detective. So he just kind of gets on with doing the detecting, but never seems particularly happy about it. But I really like the Maigret novels. I think they're interesting mysteries. This one started in fantastic fashion with Maigret being told that there was going to be a murder or a death at a church. And indeed there is, an elderly woman dies there, and it's about him investigating that, and it got darker and darker and more gothic as it went on. So a very enjoyable book. Well, maybe enjoyable is maybe not quite the right word, but I had a good time with it anyway, and a good start to March Mystery Madness. After that then, something not quite a mystery, kind of more of a suspense novel. So this I read as a buddy read with Roy from the channel Roy Reads Anything. It was Kidnapped by the Cult by Kate William. I'm going to double check as I always do. Yes, so written by Kate William. Francine Pascal, whose name is on the cover, is the creator of the Sweet Valley High series. So I didn't enjoy this one quite as much as the other Sweet Valley High books I've read. So the other ones I've read were more in the horror genre. So I read a werewolf trilogy, you may remember, and a vampire trilogy. This one more of a kind of traditional suspense type book. So one of the two Sweet Valley twins falls under the spell of a cult leader who had a fantastic name, Adam Marvel. So there's this cult of kids in the local area who they appear to be do-gooders. They appear to be kind of helping people out, but actually there's something a little bit more sinister going on. So yeah, one of the twins falls under their spell, and it's about the other twin, the more sensible twin, trying to help her break free. So it was a fun read anyway. After that then, a book I was sent for review a while ago, which I really enjoyed. So this is Mischief in the Wood by Tina Rath. So I would describe this as kind of a YA, like magical realist kind of fantasy book. So about a group of school kids who meet this guy who claims to be like a fairy, and they end up getting whisked away to kind of magical lands. So it reminded me a bit, it's got a similar kind of vibe to the movie Labyrinth, that kind of mix of real world and fantasy world, which I always really enjoy. I don't think this cover, and I did say this in the weekly wrap up where I talked about it, I don't think the cover quite fits the book. It feels more kind of folk horror-y than fantasy, and this is, I would definitely say, more of a fantasy than a folk horror book, although it does definitely have like an overlap with folk horror, and also a big overlap with Stephen King's Dark Tower series, which is referenced in this book. And I actually thought that kind of almost feels like something that might not work, a book heavily referencing another book, or in this case a series, but actually it works really well in this. So it's almost like a YA accompanying novel to the Dark Tower series, with like completely different characters and setup, but some of the inspiration for it in terms of that Roland Browning, is it Robert Browning? I can't remember the guy's name. Browning tale that King quotes at the start of the Dark Tower series is referenced in this, and they do talk about the Dark Tower books as well. So anyway, just a fun, creative fantasy novel with a bit of kind of humour, and it had, like, the real world parts of it felt very convincing. You kind of get to know the lives of this group of school kids, and they all felt credible and believable, and that made the fantasy sections kind of pop that much more. So yeah, another good one. After that then, another book I was sent for review. So this one, a thriller, 3 Mile Smile by Chad Lutzke. So kind of it felt like a throwback to kind of like a 50s noir movie. So about this guy who works in a diner. He's like a youngish guy, like early 20s, I think. And one day this couple come in. The guy is really aggressive. The woman is kind of slightly alluring in a noirish sort of a way. And she ends up like indicating to the guy who works in the diner that she's in trouble, and they run away together. So they run off, pursued by her grumpy, violent husband, and it's a bit of a kind of road movie chase thriller kind of a thing. I really enjoyed it, and it had an interesting ending as well. So it didn't go quite where I was expecting it to, which is always a bonus. So yeah, another enjoyable read, and definitely very, very kind of tense and exciting. Moving on then back to March for Mystery and Madness. So my pick for the 1940s was Green for Danger by Christianna Brand. So this was another buddy read. So I buddy read this with one of our viewers, Sherry, and we both had a really good time. Sherry did watch the movie based on this as well. I haven't managed to do that yet, but I do want to. So a really enjoyable, like, closed circle kind of a mystery set in a hospital in the UK during the Second World War, and indeed was published during the Second World War. And Christianna Brand had worked in such a hospital, and a great setup as well. So the first chapter has a postman delivering a series of letters to the hospital, and the letters are from people who are applying to work at the hospital, basically. And then it skips forward like a year. The postman is being operated on. The people who wrote those letters are now working in the hospital, and the postman dies on the operating table. And there is like a mystery around. One of these people has somehow been involved in his death. So just a very, very enjoyable vintage mystery, and the depiction of Britain at war during the Second World War, I thought was really well done as well. So it's kind of fascinating from that angle. And as I always say, pretty much when I talk about mystery novels, I think mystery novels often have something interesting to say about the time and place in which they are set, because they tend to be quite straightforward, really. But setting for mystery novels is often a big part of them. When you think about lots of mystery series, they are set in a particular city, and you can remember which city it is. So like the Morse books are set in Oxford, for example. So I think setting both in terms of time and place is really important in mysteries, and I'll definitely be talking more about that as I go through the other mysteries that I read. On that note, so the next one I read from the 1950s was The Crazy Kill by Chester Himes, which is the third book in his Harlem cycle. So a series of detective novels set in Harlem during the 50s and later decades, featuring two fantastically named detectives, Coffinhead Johnson and Gravedigger Jones, who are like these really tough black detectives in Harlem. So the mysteries in these books are always enjoyable, but what's really, really great about them is that sense of place. So you really get a sense of the community of Harlem at the time, and that he like Chester Himes spends probably more time talking about the different characters who populate that community than he does on the actual mystery, which may sound like not what you want from a mystery novel, but I actually think it works brilliantly. So this one starts with a guy leaning out of a window watching a cop chase someone along the street, and he ends up leaning out so far that he falls out of the window into at the outside of a bakery outside, falls into all of these loaves of bread which cushion his fall. He gets up and walks away, and lo and behold, a little bit later a dead body is found in that same place, and the book revolves around the investigation into that murder. So just another really, really enjoyable mystery. But yeah, the setting in this one is everything. And I'm really looking forward to reading more books in this series. I've got another 2 of these lovely omnibus editions published by Melvin Van Peebles, who was the father of Mario Van Peebles, who was a star of a bunch of kind of action movies during the 90s, I think it was. So yeah, they're really, really entertaining, these books. Definitely want to read more of them. Moving on now then to a few that I read digitally. So the first of those was my 1960s pick for March Mystery Madness. So this was Bright Orange for the Shroud by John D. MacDonald, one of the Travis McGee series of mysteries. So Travis McGee is kind of like a detective for hire, but particularly deals with kind of salvage and stuff like that. But in this book, he investigates a friend of his who's basically been conned. So it's about him trying to figure out how this guy got swindled out of a load of money, and Travis McGee goes on that mission to unpick, in particular, this woman who got involved with this guy and find out where his money's gone. So another enjoyable mystery. I'll be honest, I didn't enjoy this one as much as the couple of books I've just talked about, but Travis McGee is just an entertaining character to read, so still a fun book. After that then, I moved on to the 1970s and I read Mortal Stakes by Robert B. Parker, which is the third, I think, of the Spencer series of novels. So a series of books set in Boston. This one has Spencer, who's a private eye, investigating, or he gets hired by someone who works with one of the local baseball teams, because they think that one of their star players is throwing games, basically. So is being manipulated in some way by someone who's got something to do with gambling, and there's some kind of con going on. Again, just a really, really enjoyable mystery. And with these books, there's a bit of, there's definitely something around the setting, and particularly the period. Like, they do feel like books from the 1970s. And you do get a bit of a flavour of Boston, but it's really Spencer who's the star of these books. He's such an entertaining character to read. He's got a bit of that kind of humorous, hard-boiled dialogue going on. He's also really into cooking, and I always enjoy reading about what he's cooking in these books. You always get a few scenes, often where he's met a lady and invited her back for a meal, and you discover what he's cooking for her. But yeah, he's a bit of a culinary expert, and that adds a nice something extra to the books. So yeah, very amusing and entertaining, and the mystery in this one was very, very good as well. After that then I moved on to the 1980s, and I read Out on the Cutting Edge by Lawrence Block, which is one of the Matt Scudder books. So Matt Scudder is a fantastically interesting private eye. So this one's set in New York. Scudder is an alcoholic, and in this one, which I can't remember exactly, I think it's like 5 or 6 in the series, he's sober, he's recovering, he's going to AA meetings, and indeed there are 2 mysteries in this book, one of which he's hired to investigate, and one of which he ends up investigating because someone he's met at one of these AA meetings kind of vanishes, and it's about him trying to find out what's happened to them. So Scudder as a character is, I think, really, really well done. You really he feels very, very convincing in terms of his struggles with alcohol, and all that detail around kind of Alcoholics Anonymous and stuff like that. I thought was really, really well done in this book. And there is a fantastic twist towards the end of the book, which I did not see coming at all, which I thought was just beautifully, beautifully done. So I really, really enjoyed this one a lot, and I cannot wait to read more of the Matt Scudder books. I do think he's a great character, and I love that side of detective novels where you get that series and you gradually see the character built up over time. So Spencer in the Robert B. Parker books I've read so far doesn't really change that much from book to book, but Matt Scudder definitely does. You really see his growth as a character, and you also see Lawrence Block's writing improving as he hones his craft and gets stronger and stronger as a writer. So I really can't recommend the Matt Scudder books enough. Moving on then, my book from the 90s. And this was not a duff, so I enjoyed this book, but it did break the trend that I'd had with my March Mystery Madness books of reading books that were written in a decade and were also set in that decade. So my pick for the 90s was The Beekeeper's Apprentice by Laurie R. King, which is a Sherlock Holmes novel. So it features Sherlock Holmes, who has, it's like set after the Conan Doyle books. He's retired to the Sussex countryside, very close to where I live, in fact. And he meets a teenage girl there who is like similarly a genius. And it's about them, him and this girl, Mary, becoming friends and starting to investigate cases together. So a really enjoyable mystery book. I did think it suffered a little bit from not really having a through plot. So the through plot really in the book is their friendship and how that develops over time. And that was definitely enjoyable to read. But what you get, in fact, is a series of mysteries building up to like the main mystery in the second half of the book. So as a mystery novel, it was kind of a bit less satisfying than some of the other ones because it kind of stops and starts a little bit. But really nicely written. I did enjoy it. The Holmesy bits in it are fantastic. There are loads of bits where Holmes is in disguise, which is something I've always enjoyed about Sherlock Holmes stories. So yeah, I definitely enjoyed it. But for me, I'd really got into a rhythm of enjoying reading like books set in different decades and like comparing them. So reading a book that was set, you know, towards the start of the 20th century, rather than actually in the 1990s, felt like a bit of a miss for me. After that then, I read the book for the Criminally Book Club this month. If you fancy joining that, there's always links in the description to my video where you can find out more information. So this was The Auctioneer by Joan Samson. I have just put up a review video of that last week, so check that out if you want more information about it. But a really interesting 70s horror novel about a small town in, I've forgotten where it was now, New Hampshire, and this charismatic character, Pearlie Dunsmore, comes to town, and he is an auctioneer, and he kind of brings the town under his sway and persuades people in the town to basically let him auction their stuff off. So he builds up wealth through doing that, and basically over the course of the book builds up more and more influence in the town. He is just a fantastic character. There's a real like dark edge to this book. In many ways, it doesn't feel like a traditional horror novel, but there's definitely something creepy going on, and it's kind of a book that's unsettling, I guess, rather than scary. So the book really, really comes to life when he is on the page. I found other parts of the book less engaging, but when Pearlie is kind of front and centre, it's a wonderful read. Some of his speeches are just really, really entertaining, as what he does becomes more and more outrageous as the book progresses. It really was very, very interesting and gripping and entertaining. So yeah, I do recommend that one. Next up then, did I say who it was by? I can't remember if I did or not. So it's by Joan Samson. Next up then, something completely different. So one of the first books I read after, one of the first books I bought after falling off the Rebought Your Own wagon was Hometown Hospital by Lydia Balmain, a early 90s Mills and Boon medical romance. So definitely felt like a 90s book. If I'd wanted a 90s book, and didn't get it from The Beekeeper's Apprentice, I definitely got it from this. So lots of kind of touches of Bridget Jones and things like that in this. But basically about a staff nurse who's moved to a new town to work in the hospital. She meets at the start of the book, and as is often the case with things like this, they have a bit of a falling out when they first meet. But she meets this handsome paediatrician who's going to be like the main doctor she's working with, and they have a kind of sparky relationship at work. So they disagree on quite a lot of things at work, but outside of work, because they happen to live close to each other, naturally romance is kindled. So just a light, enjoyable, amusing romance until towards the end of the book when something really dramatic and unexpected happens. And I found the twist in this book, it was like genuinely surprising, but also reflecting on it, quite convincing and interesting. So yeah, an unexpected gem. I enjoyed this more than I expected to. I always like this kind of quick, easy read, but this one, because of that twist, did have something a little bit extra. After that then, something similarly quick and easy. This one was sent to me by Eric Mr. Fright, the publisher of Midnight Magazine, which I've talked about on the channel before. So he very kindly sent me a couple of these Ninja Master novels. Let me hold it up to the camera so you can you can see just how fantastic that cover is. So this is a series of men's adventure books published, I think, in the early 80s. About this character, what's his name? Brett Wallace, who is the ninja master. So in this one, he goes up against like a gambling ring, and there's kind of prostitution woven into that as well. I think it's in Atlantic City, it's set. So just a very silly, very over the top at times. Some of the violence in this was really extreme, and not always in a fun way. Some of the violence was quite unpleasant, but still an entertaining read. And the way the ninja stuff is woven into it was really, really entertaining. As I said, I think in my weekly wrap up, the way he does it is he'll come up against some kind of obstacle that seems insurmountable, and then Wade Barker, I didn't tell you the name of the author, so it's $1 Million Massacre by Wade Barker. So Wade Barker then tells you a Japanese word which is the ninja skill of dealing with that obstacle, and Brett Wallace then overcomes the obstacle. So yeah, just a fun, cheap and nasty, but quite entertaining read. After that, then something very, very nasty indeed. So where are we now? My 2000s pick for March Mystery Madness was The Treatment by Mo Hayder. So this is a really, really disturbing, like not a serial killer book, but it kind of has flavours of serial killer fiction to it, despite the fact that it's not actually about a serial killer, but it has a similar kind of vibe. So the sequel to Birdman, which was the first in her Jack Caffrey series, people had told me that this was more disturbing than Birdman, and it definitely was. So I won't go into too much of the plot, but it starts with the discovery of a family where the mother and father have been chained up in their house for a few days, and their son, has vanished. And Jack Caffrey, who's the lead investigator of a team of investigators, gets involved in investigating it. And is often the case with with this kind of book. He's got a lot of past trauma, which relates to his brother, who vanished in kind of a similar way when they were kids. And that's talked about quite a lot in Birdman, in the first book, which is a serial killer book. But in this one, that story develops further. So you've got these two stories kind of running in parallel, one about the past, one about the present. Really, really, when you find out what's going on with both of those stories, it's hugely disturbing. So definitely not a book I would recommend to people who are faint of heart. But I really think Mo Hayder did a fantastic job with these books, and I'm looking forward to reading more of them. In particular with this one, there was a twist at the end, which I did see coming, but was still just phenomenal. I thought it was really excellent, and also a great sense of place. So set in the early 2000s in London, which is a time and place that I know reasonably well, and definitely felt very, very convincing, to the extent that there was like some slang from back then, which has now fallen completely out of fashion in the UK, which I almost cringed a bit at reading again. But she definitely did capture that time and place well. After that, then I finished a book I'd kind of been reading throughout the month, so I've been listening to the audiobook of it. Another mystery novel, which I could have read for my 80s pick, and would have been an interesting pick for that actually. That was Gorky Park by Martin Cruz Smith. So I read this for my Novel Life Challenge, where I'm reading a book from every year I've been alive in chronological order. This was the pick for 1981. So a really, really great book. The first in a series featuring a Russian detective called Arkady Renko. So set in Moscow, but during the Soviet era, clearly, because it was written and set in 1981. And really interesting to see kind of the detail of what life was like in the Soviet Union. And it sounds like Martin Cruz Smith did quite a lot of research, and I think it's considered to be quite a realistic portrayal. So the kind of mystery at the heart of it is the discovery of 3 bodies in Gorky Park, as the name suggests. So they've been shot, and Renko is investigating what's happened to them, and the kind of the conspiracy around their deaths grows and grows and grows as the book progresses. It's quite a long book, but it definitely justifies its length. There's loads of twists and turns to the plot. The detail, as I say, of life in the Soviet Union, I thought was really well done. But it's also just a really, really engrossing mystery, and I can't wait to read more in this series. Martin Cruz apparently is still writing them, people have told me in the comments. So he follows, that kind of trajectory of Russia out of the Soviet era through, kind of the 90s into the 2000s. Really interested to see how he, continues to realistically portray life in Russia. So definitely a great book, which I really recommend if you haven't read it. I had a copy of it years and years ago, never got around to reading it. I wish I had. Right, next then we have the book that I read for the Buddy Reading with My Dad project, which was Round the Bend by Nevil Shute. So I'm probably going to do a review of this one. A really, really interesting book. So written in, I think, the early 1950s. Let me double check that. 51, yeah. Just after the Second World War, and focuses on, starts actually before the Second World War, and then follows the kind of life of its main character through the Second World War. So focuses on a guy called Tom Cutter, who is like an engineer, as indeed Nevil Shute was. And the thing that's interesting, I thought was really interesting about this book, is that he goes through a traumatic experience during the Second World War. And an experience which is completely convincing. I'm sure this did happen to many people, but it's not the kind of traumatic experience that would immediately leap to mind when you think about someone, particularly a man, during the Second World War. You kind of think about them, having shell shock or something like that, having fought in terrible conditions. That isn't the case for this guy at all. He does his duty. He works as an engineer servicing planes for the RAF. But the trauma is actually something that happens on the home front. So I thought that was a really interesting way to start the book. And it then follows him as he leaves the UK and goes to the Middle East to set up his own like plane company, basically like an aviation company, where he has a plane that uses to transport goods and passengers and things like that. And it's about him slowly growing that business. But more than that, about the fact that somebody who works for him develops this, this kind of almost like a religion around doing a good job, basically, about, servicing planes in the right way, but using kind of religious philosophy to inform that job. It's a really, really interesting concept and really nicely handled by Nevil Shute, who was someone who was very much, about that kind, that kind of ethos of work as something that has meaning in its own right, I guess. A bit like Herman Melville, maybe. So yeah, really, really interesting kind of religious aspect to this book. And also really interesting, thread running all the way through the book about tolerance. So Tom Cutter, the main character, is, a white British guy, but the vast majority of the other characters are not white. So really interesting to see how he interacts with them, how he defends them against racism from white characters. And a lot of these characters are, probably the kinds of people that you wouldn't really have seen typically represented in, British books from the 1950s. So really interesting to see that. I thought Nevil Shute did a really good job of writing a book that was, kind of for its time, quite anti-racist. Moving on then, we are nearly at the end. So my 2010s pick for March Mystery Madness then was City of the Dead by Sara Gran, which is set in New Orleans in the wake of Hurricane Katrina. So about this detective, Claire DeWitt, who goes to New Orleans to investigate the disappearance of someone who appears to just have disappeared, in the wake of Katrina, basically, as part of that disaster. But actually, one of his relatives thinks there's a bit more going on, and so hires Claire DeWitt to find out what's happened. And indeed, as you can probably guess, there was a bit more going on. So a very interesting mystery. Again, that sense of place is wonderful in this. You really feel like you get to know New Orleans a bit. Somewhere I've never visited, but would love to. So that side of it is great. But there's also this wonderful backstory about how Claire DeWitt became fascinated by detection in the first place, which came through her reading this mysterious French book by this French criminologist about the art of detection when she was a kid. So she and one of her friends read it. Again, there's that kind of past trauma. So one of her friends kind of vanished. But just the way this French book is interwoven throughout the story, the main story in this, I thought was really beautifully done. And it's really, there's something like, if you'll pardon the pun, like really mysterious about this whole book. You get the sense almost there's something like slightly otherworldly about it. I thought it was a really, really fascinating way to write a mystery book that kind of reflects on the nature of mystery as well as being a satisfying mystery novel. So another one I really enjoyed. The final book then that I finished this month was one that was very kindly sent to me by Jordan, one of my viewers, in response to my Perfect Shelf video, where I said that one of the books I would love to have on my Perfect Shelf was the novelisation of Videodrome by Jack Martin in the UK paperback edition, and that is indeed what this is. So what a fantastic cover with Debbie Harry on the front there. So yeah, Jordan had a copy of this, very kindly sent it to me. I read this back when I was a teenager and really, really enjoyed rereading it. So it's just a really good novelisation. So Jack Martin is actually a pseudonym of the horror writer Dennis Etchison, who under the name Dennis Etchison I think wrote the novelisation of John Carpenter's movie The Fog, which I've also read, but again, like back in the day. This is just, it's fascinating because novelisations, and this is the case with this one, are often written before the movie is actually finished. You know, they're written from the script. And by the sound of it, Dennis Etchison actually travelled to Toronto and met with David Cronenberg and, you know, discussed the movie, discussed the script, discussed, you know, what it was going to look like on screen. I'm not sure how much of the kind of rushes and things like that of the finished film he was able to see, but it really does capture the vibe of Videodrome. And if you've seen Videodrome, it's a really interesting but very weird and disturbing film. So it's about a guy, played in the movie by James Woods, who runs a cable TV channel in the States. I think it's not in Pittsburgh, somewhere in the States. And he discovers, or someone who works for him at the TV channel, discovers this weird kind of apparent, like kind of pirate TV feed of this show called Videodrome, which appears to be like snuff movies, basically. And he becomes fascinated. The main character, Max Wren, becomes fascinated with this Videodrome thing, but also meets the Debbie Harry character, who's like a kind of pop psychologist, and she becomes fascinated with it as well. And as the book progresses, it becomes more and more weird. There's lots of kind of hallucination sequences and things like that, and it gets bizarrer and bizarrer as it goes on. If you've seen the film, it feels like something which is very, very visual and would be difficult to turn into a novel. But I thought Dennis Etchison actually did a fantastic job with it. I really enjoyed this a great deal, and it was it was fun for me to reread the book, having read it. So I read the book long before I ever saw the film, but it really made me want to rewatch the movie again. So yeah, a really good end to the month. So in terms of my 2 DNFs for the month, both of those were mystery novels. As I say, I don't normally talk about DNFs on the channel, but I thought I would for these two. So the first of those was my, which pick was it? My 2000 pick. So I ended up reading the Mo Hayder book instead, but the one I had picked was In the Woods by Tana French, which is a mystery novel set in Dublin, the first of her Dublin Murder Squad series, which loads of people seem to really, really like. It's the second Tana French book I've tried, and I just can't get on with her writing. There's something about there's a slight, for me at least, kind of ponderousness to her writing that doesn't kind of capture me and doesn't sweep me along with the story. So I tried, a fair few pages of it, but I just wasn't getting into it at all. So I decided to put that one to one side. And I've had people in the comments when I've said that saying both, they really, really like Tana French, but other people saying, probably an equal number, saying, yeah, they just can't get on with her books either. So that was my first DNF of the month. And then the second one was the 2020s one. So I had picked a book by Denise Mina, The Second Murderer, for my 2020s read, and I decided not to read that one after my experience with The Beekeeper's Apprentice, because like The Beekeeper's Apprentice, it's not set in the decade in which it was written. Also like The Beekeeper's Apprentice, it's a pastiche novel where a modern writer picks up an old character, so in this case it's a Philip Marlowe novel. So I was a little bit unsure about it because of that. I love Robin Chandler's prose. I'm not sure how well anyone else, even a writer as good as Dennis Mina, would do it. But the fact that it wasn't set in the 2020s, after my experience with The Beekeeper's Apprentice, I decided it wasn't the right thing to read. So instead I picked up a book by a guy called Tim Sullivan called The Dentist, which is the first in a series of books about a detective called George Cross, who's on the autistic spectrum. And I was expecting to really enjoy this. I saw Tim Sullivan speak at a local crime writing event recently, and he was very, very engaging, very, very funny guy indeed. Really charismatic and just fun to watch. But I'm afraid I didn't get on with the book at all. I tried a bit of it, and I wasn't swept up by the mystery, and I wasn't swept up by the portrayal of this central character as well. I was really intrigued to read a book about a character with autism, but I felt like he just didn't do a good job of nailing that. It felt like it wasn't subtly done. There were, almost like he had a tick list of things, of traits that he wanted to tick off for this character, and it kind of was a bit obvious because of that. So it felt like the character's autism like overwhelmed their other characteristics, if you like. So for me, I'm afraid it didn't work, which is a shame. So I'm looking forward to the series. But anyway, so those are my 2 DNFs of the month. So that is me done. So yeah, 18 books, 2 DNFs. Let me know if you took part in March Mystery Madness and what you read. Let me know if you've read any of the books I talked about today. Hope you had a fantastic reading month in March. I definitely did. Right, this is Editing Ollie here. I've just got to this point in editing the video and realised that I didn't tell you what my favourite book of the month was. So it was Out on the Cutting Edge by Lawrence Block. I just thought it was fantastically well done, both as a mystery novel and as a character study. So I read some really, really great mysteries this month, but that I think was the one that stood out for me. Anyway, I will hand you back to Ollie from a couple of days ago to finish the video. Anyway, I will leave it there and say, as always, thanks very much for watching. Hope you're safe and well out there. Hope you're reading good stuff. And I'll speak to you again very soon. Cheerio.